phosphoric acid that's used or discussed in the application, so I'd like to maybe take a moment to explain that. You asked particularly, are there estimates of how much will be chemically consumed during operations and what fraction will be discharged to Lake Erie? We noted in our application that, or in our response, that Table 3.6.1 and 3.6-2 describe the chemicals that are added to the CERC system and also the effluent chemical characteristics for Fermi 3. We talk about adding a corrosion inhibitor, and that's the 30% solution of phosphoric acid. It's a particular chemical by a vendor. And the effluent characteristics are based on using the manufacturer's recommendation, and that's how we get to the 3.5 ppm. Most of that is discharged into Lake Erie. Of course, the discharge, the effluent stream, will of course comply with whatever the NDPES permit limits are for phosphorus. That limit is intended to be protective of beneficial uses of water, including preventing algal blooms and any other harmful impacts to beneficial uses.
Is phosphoric acid used in Fermi 2 as well?
You're coming to that? I was going to get to that, but this is right up right now. Fermi 2 does not use phosphoric acid as a corrosion inhibitor. It doesn't use it on a regular basis. It uses it in one subsystem, the residual, some portion of the residual heat removal system, and it only occasionally decants. For the NPDES permit for Fermi 2, there is no limit on phosphorus, and that's because it hasn't been found to be part of the discharge from Fermi 2. The pre-permit levels were very low. Let's see, some recent measurements show that the intake concentration, that is the water that's coming from Lake Erie, is 0.02 ppm. The outflow was 0.2 ppm, and that's well below any threshold that Michigan DEQ deemed that warranted any effluent limit or even further study. Yeah, and of course, the phosphoric acid, if there was some need, there are alternative corrosion inhibitors that you can use that don't contain phosphoric acid. That's certainly something we would consider if that was necessary to comply with the NPDES permit. Regarding algal growth more generally, we've never observed any issues with algal blooms at Fermi or any other of the Detroit Edison plants. So there's no operating experience to suggest that this is a potential issue. The outfalls are inspected daily as consistent with the NPDES permit, so we do have an ongoing basis for saying that we haven't had those types of problems with power plants. Regarding algal growth generally, all of the data indicates that it's really driven primarily by nutrients contained in runoff. So that's non-point source pollution rather than the point source that we would have discharging effluents from Fermi 3. With respect to contention 14, the 16 pages of that contention is mostly repetitive stuff that is in contentions 1 and contention 6. There's only one real new issue that's raised there, and that's the toxic and etiological agents that are discussed. The proposed contention merely cuts and pastes large sections of the ER where we discuss the potential impacts and the steps we've taken to reduce them to safe levels or to ensure that they don't become a problem. The petitioners have not provided any explanation of how those impacts are not adequately discussed or how they would lead to some different type of adverse impact on the environment that was not considered. And so for this reason, contention 14, like the other two contentions, is inadmissible.
Very well, thank you. Let's hear from the NRC staff.
Thank you. I'll begin by saying that we also stand by what we have submitted in our written answer so far, and I have a few comments to add and then to address the board's questions. First, when we're addressing contention 1 and contention 6 together, they are to some extent contradictory on their face, because one is suggesting that there needs to be a larger region of interest for some impacts, and another is suggesting there needs to be a smaller region of impact for some impacts. We don't think that this is a flat-out contradiction, because obviously it does depend on what the impact is. And we believe that the applicant's ER has scaled things appropriately for the impacts being considered. In terms of the first question, just a moment. about the consideration of the cumulative effects in terms of a baseline. We agree with the board's decision in Calvert Cliffs that considering the impacts in aggregate is sufficient and that the individual sources do not need to be called out individually. The cumulative effects in this case would certainly include anything that has a measurable impact in the region under consideration, and that includes the Davis-Besse facility. Regarding license renewal, we know of, just a moment. We know of 3 plants that are considering that. One has actually submitted an application, and the Kewaunee plant on Lake Michigan has submitted an application. Davis-Besse and Perry are considering it, but as far as I know, as of this past weekend, we have not received the applications yet.
Is there any
Any reason to think?
these license renewals would affect baseline conditions for Fermi 3?
If something changed, possibly, but we have no reason to think that that would be the case, and, you know, there's no reason to think that any emissions that exist would change or that the effects would change.
Based on what you know today?
Yes, yes. Distances between the proposed Fermi reactor and proposed nuclear facilities in Canada. Have you received all the information you need on that, or have a list here?
I think we've heard.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm good.
Okay. And the significant new federal actions, the proposed license renewals and decommissioning of Fermi 1.
Are there any other federal actions in addition to 9 Mile Point 3 on Lake Ontario that you know of? Any other proposed licensing actions other than the renewals you've already mentioned?
Not that we're aware of, no. Do you have any other questions for us?
I'm just, one of the questions that we asked was, there appears to be a contradiction between whether the applicant has considered lake levels. The petitioner has challenged that the change in water level, either due to global warming or wind effects, hasn't been considered in the application. And I'll address it to you first, but certainly the applicant can speak up.
It's, I believe we argued in our written submission that it has been considered. As far as the difference in materials that the 2 other parties are citing to support their positions, I think they should speak to those.
Thank you. The application does consider water level changes that are well within and actually outside the range of water level changes that were posited to occur as a result of climate change. The application, the design of the plan is based on the record historical range, including the record low, with an additional margin of safety to take into account the limited accuracy of that time frame. The elevation at the bottom of the intake bay at the entrance to the pump house is 559 feet, and that's several feet below the record low water level, which is again 10 feet or so below where we are now.
The petition seems to paint a picture of dire consequences in terms of during operation the level dropping below some number, I guess below the intake structure. What in actuality, I get a sense these are slow evolving time frames, and what would actually happen within the environment of an operating plant? Let's see Fermi 3 does receive the licenses in operation, and we continue to see dramatic changes in lake level. What actually would occur within the operation of the facility?